In the summer of 1941, the German war machine seemed unstoppable. They had conquered France in 6 weeks. They had pushed the British off the continent. Their doctrine of blitzkrieg, or lightning war, was built on speed, precision, and the belief that their engineering was superior to anything the world could offer. But on a dusty road near the Soviet border, that belief was shattered by a single steel monster sitting motionless on the horizon. The German shells simply bounced off its hull. The anti-tank guns that had devastated Europe were useless against it. This was not just a new vehicle. It was a wake-up call that the rules of warfare had changed forever. Today, we are looking at the 3 tanks that did not just participate in the Second World War, but completely altered its course. We are judging them on strict criteria: their influence on strategy, the scale of mass production, real combat results, and the legacy they left behind. These are the machines that turned the tide. Before we dive into the steel beast that terrified the Wehrmacht, take a brief second to hit the subscribe button. We cover the engineering and history that shaped our modern world, and you do not want to miss our upcoming breakdown of aerial warfare. The first tank on our list is the Soviet T-34. To understand why this machine changed history, you have to look at the state of tank design in 1939. Most tanks were boxy. They had vertical armor plates joined at 90-degree angles. This made sense for manufacturing, but it was a death sentence in combat. A vertical plate takes the full force of an incoming shell. The Soviet engineers, led by Mikhail Koshkin, decided to take a gamble that would revolutionize warfare. They did not just add more steel. They changed the geometry of the tank itself. The T-34 introduced the concept of sloped armor to the mass market. By angling the front armor plate at 60 degrees, the effective thickness of the steel was doubled without adding extra weight. A 45mm plate suddenly behaved like it was 90 millimeters thick. Furthermore, the slope caused enemy shells to deflect, or ricochet, away from the hull. When German Panzer commanders first encountered the T-34, they reported watching their rounds strike the Soviet tanks and simply fly off into the sky. It was a tactical nightmare for the Germans, who were forced to bring heavy artillery to the front lines just to stop a medium tank. However, the strategic value of the T-34 was not just in its armor. It was in its mobility. The tank was powered by a V-type, 12-cylinder diesel engine made of aluminum. While German tanks ran on gasoline, which was highly flammable and prone to exploding when hit, the T-34 used diesel. This gave it a greater range and reduced the risk of catastrophic fires. Its wide tracks were designed specifically for the soft mud and snow of the Eastern Front. While narrow-tracked German vehicles sank and stalled in the Russian winter, the T-34 glided over the terrain. This allowed the Soviet commanders to launch counterattacks in weather conditions that their enemies considered impossible for fighting. This mobility solved a crucial tactical task: the ability to maneuver faster than the opponent could react. In the vast steppes of Russia, speed was armor. But the most significant factor, the one that truly changed the course of the war, was mass production. The design of the T-34 was intentionally crude. It lacked the refined finish of Western vehicles. The welds were rough. The transmission was difficult to shift. Drivers often had to use a hammer to change gears. There was no comfort for the crew. But this simplicity meant it could be built by unskilled labor in unheated factories, often by women and children, while the main workforce was at the front. By 1944, the Soviet Union was producing tens of thousands of T-34s. For the historical significance of the T-34 cannot be overstated. It ended the era of the light tank and established the blueprint for the main battle tank concept that we use today. It combined firepower, protection, and mobility in a single balanced package. It proved that in a total war, the best weapon is not always the most sophisticated one, but the one that can be produced, repaired, and fielded in the highest numbers. The T-34 did not just win battles. It saved Moscow, turned the tide at Stalingrad, and eventually rolled into Berlin. It was the anvil upon which the German army was broken. But while the Soviets were winning through mass and geometry in the East, a different philosophy was emerging across the ocean. The United States was watching, and they knew that to liberate Europe, they would need a machine that could travel across the world and fight reliably in any environment. They did not build a monster. They built a workhorse. While the Soviet Union fought a war of desperate survival on their own soil, the United States faced a logistical challenge that no nation in history had ever attempted. To fight the Axis powers, America had to transport an entire army across the Atlantic Ocean. This geographical reality dictated the design of the second tank that changed the world, the M4 Sherman. Critics often look at the Sherman and compare its armor thickness or gun caliber directly to a German Tiger, concluding that the American tank was inferior. This is a fundamental misunderstanding of strategy. The German heavy tanks were engineered as if they were fighting a duel. The Sherman was engineered to win a global war. The American military realized early on that the best tank in the world is useless if you cannot get it to the battlefield. The M4 was strictly limited by the lifting capacity of dock cranes and the width of ship cargo holds. It had to be light enough to cross temporary bridges and reliable enough to drive hundreds of miles without a major overhaul. The genius of the Sherman lay in its standardization and reliability. It was the product of the Detroit automotive industry, which applied mass production techniques that were years ahead of European factories. When an American tank reached the front lines in Normandy or the Pacific, it worked. If a part broke, it could be swapped with a replacement from any other Sherman in minutes. In contrast, German tanks often required custom-fitted parts that had to be shipped from factories deep in Germany. There are records of German units abandoning their heavy tanks simply because they ran out of spare transmission gears, while the Shermans kept moving. The Sherman solved a specific tactical task that is often overlooked: infantry support. Analysis of combat logs from the Second World War shows that tanks spent only a small fraction of their time fighting other tanks. The vast majority of their time was spent destroying bunkers, machine gun nests, and anti-tank positions. For this role, the Sherman was supreme. Its 75mm main gun possessed an excellent high-explosive shell that was far superior to the anti-tank-focused rounds of the German Panthers. The Sherman could rotate its turret faster than almost any enemy tank, allowing the crew to react instantly to ambushes in the hedgerows of France or the ruins of furthermore. The Sherman introduced a level of technological sophistication that was invisible from the outside. It was one of the first tanks to feature a gyroscopic stabilizer for its main gun. While this system was complex and required training, it allowed the tank to fire with reasonable accuracy while moving at slow speeds, a capability that German tanks did not possess. This allowed American columns to suppress enemy defenses while closing the distance, utilizing a tactic known as marching fire. But perhaps the most significant achievement of the Sherman was crew survivability. There is a persistent myth that the Sherman was a death trap, prone to catching fire. While early models did have issues with ammunition storage, American engineers were quick to analyze the data and implement a solution. They introduced wet stowage, a system where the ammunition racks were surrounded by a jacket of water and glycerin. This simple innovation drastically reduced the chance of a catastrophic fire after a penetration. Statistical analysis from the European theater reveals that the Sherman actually had one of the highest crew survival rates of the war. If the tank was hit, the large hatches and spring-loaded escape mechanisms allowed the men to get out alive. An American tanker who survived could be placed in a new tank the next day, bringing his valuable experience back to the fight. The strategic impact of the M4 Sherman was absolute. It allowed commanders like General George Patton to execute high-speed armored thrusts across France, moving faster than the enemy could retreat. The Sherman did not need to stop for train transport. It drove on its own tracks from the beaches of Normandy to the banks of the Rhine. By 1944, the sheer volume of Shermans meant that American commanders could afford to take risks that would be suicidal for the Germans. They could flank, surround, and overwhelm superior enemy armor through coordination and numbers. The Sherman proved that in a modern mechanized conflict, logistics are just as lethal as firepower. It was the mechanical embodiment of the American philosophy: overwhelming force delivered reliably anywhere on the globe. It broke the back of the German army in the West, not by winning every one-on-one duel, but by being everywhere at once, pushing the front line forward relentlessly until the enemy simply had no space left to maneuver. However, as the Allies pushed closer to the German border, they encountered a predator that defied all logic of mass production and logistics. It was a machine built on fear, designed to be invincible, and it created a psychological shock that traumatized a generation of soldiers. This was the monster of the Wehrmacht. While the Allies were winning the war of numbers, Germany turned to the philosophy of the Wunderwaffe, or wonder weapon. They believed that superior engineering could overcome numerical inferiority. In late 1942, this belief took the form of the Panzer Kampfwagen 6, better known to the world simply as the Tiger. The Tiger I was not designed to be a mass-produced soldier like the Sherman or the T-34. It was designed to be a king. Weighing in at nearly 60 tons, it was a behemoth that dwarfed everything else on the battlefield. Its primary purpose was to dominate. It was built around the terrifying 88mm KWK-36 gun. This weapon had started its life as an anti-aircraft gun, designed to shoot down bombers at high altitudes. When mounted on a tank, it essentially became a sniper rifle for armor. A Tiger commander could identify and destroy an Allied. The combat results of the Tiger created a phenomenon known as Tiger Phobia among Allied troops. Reports from the British and American armies show that soldiers would often identify every German tank they saw as a Tiger, simply out of fear. This psychological impact was a tactical weapon in itself. It made Allied commanders cautious. It slowed down advances. There are documented engagements where a single Tiger held up an entire division for hours, simply because No one wanted to be the first to move into its line of sight. The armor of the Tiger was thick, consisting of 100 millimeters of face-hardened steel on the front. Unlike the T-34, the Tiger did not rely on sloped angles. It relied on sheer, brute thickness. At the time of its introduction, there was almost nothing in the Allied arsenal that could penetrate it from the front. Allied crews often watched their shells shatter harmlessly against the flat, vertical plates of the German giant, knowing they had only seconds before the 88-millimeter gun turned toward them. However, the Tiger also demonstrated the fatal flaw of the German war strategy: over-engineering. The tank was incredibly expensive to build. It cost more than twice as much as a Panzer IV and consumed a staggering amount of fuel, a resource Germany was rapidly running out of. Its complex, overlapping road wheels were a maintenance nightmare. In the mud and ice of the Eastern Front, mud would pack between the wheels, freeze solid overnight, and immobilize the tank completely. The Tiger was so heavy that it could not cross most bridges in Europe. It required special snorkeling equipment to ford rivers, or it had to wait for engineers to reinforce bridges, slowing down the entire army. Despite these flaws, the historical value of the Tiger is undeniable. It forced the Allies to completely rethink their own tank designs. The British rushed to mount larger 17-pounder guns on their Shermans, creating the Firefly. The Soviets developed the heavy IS-2 tanks specifically to hunt Tigers. The appearance of the Tiger escalated the arms race, pushing tank development toward heavier armor and bigger guns, a trend that continued well into the Cold War. When we look back at the Second World War, it is easy to get lost in the debates about which tank was technically the best. But history is not a video game. It is not decided by one-on-one duels in a vacuum. The Soviet T-34 proved that revolutionary design and mass production could absorb the hardest blow in history and strike back. It taught the world the value of sloped armor and diesel engines, influencing the shape of every tank built since. The American M4 Sherman proved that a war is won by logistics, reliability, and versatility. It showed that a tank is part of a larger system, one that includes supply lines, repair crews, and combined arms tactics. It was the tank that liberated the world, not because it was invincible, but because it was always there when it was needed. And the German Tiger proved the terrifying potential of heavy armor and superior firepower. It remains the ultimate symbol of the tank as a predator, a machine that commands respect and fear in equal measure. Each of these three machines solved the specific tactical problems of their nations. Each changed the strategy of their enemies, and together they wrote the history of the 20th century in tracks. Thank you for watching. If you want to see more deep dives into the military technology that shaped our reality, please hit that subscribe button right now. It helps us keep the history alive. We will see you in the next video.